to the inaugural Absolute Business Magazine Roundtable Debate, being held at the Grand Hotel in Brighton. My name is Sarah Hopwood, and I'm delighted to say that we have been joined by 6 of the leading business figures across the region to debate a range of subjects relevant to business in Sussex. To my right we have Clarence Mitchell, the prospective Conservative parliamentary candidate for Brighton Pavilion; Amanda Menahan, HR Director of the largest employer in Sussex, Hastings Direct Insurance; and Bruce Hayter, Managing Partner and Head of Commercial Law at law firm Rix & Kay. To my left we have Keith Jackman, Marketing Director of Lucas Mercedes-Benz; John Healy, Chairman of Healy's Law Firm; and Nick Askeroff, Chairman of EMC Finance. I would like to thank you all for joining us today and for your time. In our survey ahead of the magazine launch, the following questions were those most often heard. So I'm going to start with the recession. The UK seems to be pulling out of the deepest recession in a generation, which will be a huge relief to our readers. Could I ask you in turn if you share this optimistic view and if you feel that your business sector is seeing evidence of recovery? Amanda, as HR Director of our largest employer, do you see increasing employment opportunities? And what is your view about the standard of candidates coming through?
Yes, I think it's a really interesting question. I'm often asked about quality of candidates and education and employment opportunities, as you can imagine. And certainly it's a really important topic for us as a business because we recruit, last year we recruited over 600 people in the year, and we create approximately 250 jobs a year. So it's something that we are always looking at and conscious of. And I think that in terms of the standard of candidates coming through and the way that we need to contribute to that as employers, I would say that we don't have trouble recruiting, which is a surprise. With that many people, you would think that it would be something that is incredibly difficult for us, but I think that there are people coming out of schools, colleges and universities that are looking for jobs. We're recruiting. The skills that they have, we are a business that are able to fit them in somewhere. We have a variety of different opportunities and different functions that we recruit into. So there's usually something that we can offer to accommodate the particular skills and needs of candidates coming through. I think one of the things that we're working on, I think lots of businesses need to be very conscious of and be continuously looking at, is how we partner with education institutions very early on. And that's something that we've started doing in the last couple of years, and I think is one of the reasons why we don't have a difficulty recruiting, because we have a good understanding of the students that are in the education system.
Yes.
We partner with them early on, we work with those institutions to help them, give them the skills that will help them to be successful with us. I think where we do struggle is where we're looking for professional and specific skill sets at more senior levels.
Yes.
So we struggle to recruit marketing professionals, actuarial experts, maths skill sets, underwriting and those sorts of things. Those more specialist skills at a more senior level, so not coming out of college.
Yes. Bruce, do you agree with that?
Yes, in terms of the recession, I think we're optimistic in seeing that there are real green shoots coming through. And to go with that, we've certainly been recruiting over the last 12 months. Our numbers at the moment are 125, including the partners, and that's up 15 on this time last year. But I would also echo Amanda's concerns on recruiting at the professional level. There are a number of solicitors who are available, but it's the skill sets which we look for within our business, which is perhaps slightly different from other solicitors' practices in core areas. But school leavers and students coming out of university, we've seen a good flow of those over the last 12 months and some really good calibre.
Yes, and what about you, John? You have offices in Brighton and London. Is recruitment a problem for you across the board, and have you noticed a difference on the calibre of candidates between recruiting in London and Brighton?
The London market is more buoyant for lawyers. It's easier to recruit in London because there's a greater choice. Certainly, I'd echo Bruce's thoughts that to get the right professional person with the right experience is a more difficult thing to achieve. And we struggle certainly in Brighton to find the right calibre of person. I think that's a reflection on the recession and the way lawyers have had to downsize. But we are certainly growing in terms of numbers, and we've added 10% to our workforce in the last 12 months, and we'll be continuing to do so.
Fantastic. And I know you, Nick, help businesses with their finances as they make changing decisions or build and grow or whatever they're doing. Do you have you heard any of your clients talking about the calibre of their staff and reasons why they're coming to you? Is there any link there at all with their move?
Yeah, I think there is, Amanda. I think firstly, there's no doubt about the green shoots. I think we're even into phase 2, that the green shoots were there last year and we weren't sure about them, but confidence has now been restored. So we're seeing a number of things. One is acquisitions. We've got something like 8 or 9 acquisition mandates where people are looking out to buy companies to grow. And secondly, investment. Companies are carrying out those investment policies that they had in place and were fearful of doing in the last couple of years, and now they're moving ahead in terms of buying equipment, opening new offices and looking at expansion. So on the green shoot side, definitely. On the employment side, it's a massive challenge. I think the big fear of companies now is not so much will we have the money to grow, but will we find the right people to get in the right places before we ring the bell on the bus, as they say. And that is a challenge, and I don't think the right skill levels around. I think John made the point that it's easier in London, where you've got a huge catchment of available staff, and it gets more difficult as we get towards the coast. Strangely, the intern programme has been very positive. A number of companies taking on several interns in order to effectively make that the recruitment process as to who they keep on at the end of the 6 months.
Yes.
So that has been beneficial with the younger graduates who maybe don't have a lot of experience but have some quite good technical skills.
Good. And Keith, do you agree with Nick? Do you think that nearer the coast and what have you, it is more of a challenge, or is that not your experience?
Again, I think it depends which area you're looking at. For the core employees, it's not so bad. We've got quite a good retention in some of the businesses we look at in Gatwick and Brighton, but it is those more professional business people where it is definitely a struggle for us. I think key for us is retention as well. We're in a sector where it's expanding year on year, which is fantastic for us. We're trying to employ more people, but there's also a lot of movement between businesses. It's how we keep those people and keep on retaining. Sticking with us, really.
I think that's almost a bigger challenge, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Can you say that again,
right?
Matt?
I think that's almost a bigger challenge in many businesses, is actually keeping the right talent.
Yeah.
Yes, the retention.
Yeah.
Clarence, what do you think about that, particularly retention, maybe, if you can address that issue?
Well, I think it's very encouraging to hear what everybody's been saying, that politicians have always been wary of talking about green shoots in the past for fear of getting it wrong, but it's quite clear that the national recovery is now underway. We're seeing very positive data across all sectors, not least services, construction particularly, and manufacturing even is beginning to pick up, but a lot more still needs to be done there. Unemployment is falling. Employment is at its highest level nationally, 30 million people now in work, which is great news. And it's fantastic to hear that that is beginning to filter down locally into Sussex, into Brighton. But as I say, there's a lot more work to be done, particularly with youth unemployment. So the opportunities that are there. Younger people do need to be encouraged to be in a position to be able to go for those. Retention, to come to your specific point, obviously that is the sign of movement, is a sign of a buoyant jobs market, so inevitably there will be a degree of that, but that surely is down to the individual companies to make sure that they have the most attractive prospect, the most attractive offer. We as a party, the Conservatives, are the party of business. We will always support enterprise, we will always support business. We're doing our best to make sure that the the fiscal retrenchment that's been ongoing to recover from the recession continues, the challenge we have over the next 15, 16 months is to make sure that businesses and indeed consumers, people at home, begin to see a difference in their salary levels compared to inflation. But it's very encouraging at the moment, and it's all moving in the right direction.
Good. Now, I know we're here to speak about business in Sussex, but can I ask you specifically about Brighton? If you are voted in, is there any particular initiative that you would bring in that would actually help fill these gaps that we're talking about?
We want to make sure that as many of the independent businesses down here have as relatively easy a time as possible. We want to see reductions, discounts in business rates, for instance. We want to see lower jobs taxes. National insurance for the under-21s will be abolished for the first instance. And we need to see the young people of the city finding work again. And there are so many thriving, independent, vibrant businesses down here. They need every support we can get to make sure those jobs come into them, as well as the bigger corporates.
So can I quote you on discounting business rates? Or
You can. £1,000 on small businesses will be a discount if there's a Conservative government next time round.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the next question. So the green shoots of recovery are clearly visible, as you've all just reflected. The big question is, how do we prevent this now from happening again? Nick, can I ask, in your opinion, how do we prevent it, and what do you think needs to be done?
Okay, I think first off we need to remember that this recession was different. We ran out of cash. Previous recessions were a lack of demand, soft demand, that caused a lack of consumption, and manufacturing suffered. This was very different, and we must also remember that we'll never stop it happening again. Recessions are cyclical. We've had one in the 70s, one in the 80s, one in the 90s. The recent one, what was different was it's lasted for 7 years, and it started at different points of the lack of finance and the banking system actually collapsing, very nearly collapsing, if it wasn't the government support. So I think we can stop this one again with better regulation and better monitoring, and to stop our city brethren taking too many risks. But I don't think we'll ever stop a recession happening again. What we need to do is get some structures in place that give us continuity, sustainability within the economy. If the government, whichever government is in position, gives consistency, businesses will find the way through. We've been particularly good at that over the generations.
Yes. And I'd like to come to you, Clarence, straight away to say, there are many that are reflecting. It's as Nick's just said, it's almost been like a reset this time. What do you think the government, we're hearing what they're doing at the moment, but anything in particular that you think moving forward that the government must make sure above everything else they hold their word and deliver?
We need to keep delivering the programme of fiscal responsibility that's been ongoing since the 2010 election, to make sure that we do reduce the deficit. Deficit reduction is all. If we get that right, the government's borrowing comes down, will enable us and the Bank of England, independently of course, but to keep interest rates low, hopefully, for as long as possible. And once the economy nationally begins to turn, that prosperity will flow into the South East, particularly given that there are so many opportunities and firms down here. If we give up now, this is what the Chancellor's been saying, we need more time, but we're a long way from succeeding in that battle. But the deficit reduction is the principal core tenet, if you like, of the philosophy that the coalition is working towards at present. On top of that, the Prime Minister made it clear recently that pensioners too will have their pensions safeguarded with the triple lock. So that is a clear-cut, one of the first clear-cut commitments ahead of the next election that we will stick to. But as I say, everything flows from the prosperity that comes through the proper deficit reduction. We've got to continue that and be given more time to do that.
Clarence, we're not going to get the public sector deficit under control until we cope with public sector pensions, are we? The public sector pension burden that hasn't been addressed is ongoing, and it's a massive challenge, and not so much even to our generation, but the next generation of workers who have to pay the burden of that.
That's true. The public sector, in many respects, is still bloated, and it needs to be brought into line with the private sector as best we can. We've seen that with pay freezes, and likewise with pensions. Action needs to be taken. I agree on that point. But essentially, government spending has been out of control in the past, frankly. National debt at the moment is 1.5 trillion. That's nearly 100% of GDP. Now, every year the deficit adds to that. we've got to reduce that rate of the addition to the national debt, and in turn, as I say, the positive aspects will flow from that, and pensions is just a part of that overall equation.
Your thoughts, Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, the pensions question is an interesting one. We've just gone through the auto-enrolment procedure, which I think is great news for the economy, and we all know that the ageing population are heading toward a disaster if that's not addressed, and I think that's been a great move that the government has implemented. It has been a challenging process to implement,
Yes.
but from an employment perspective I think it's absolutely the right thing, and I think
And again, we've been giving smaller firms more time to implement it. Obviously, bigger firms are doing it now, but the smallest firms won't have to do it until after the election. But essentially, it will help at least 9 million people to start saving for their futures,
Absolutely.
where they haven't been in the past. I mean, the numbers under the previous government were falling rapidly. That's why auto-enrolment was brought in.
And it shows that it's working because we've seen a massive uptake. So that intervention
that's encouraging
has
too.
worked because obviously, as you know, people had the ability to opt out and they haven't.
So, on to the next question. In these uncertain times, would you say it is brave or foolish to start a new business? And what advice would you give to Sussex startups to avoid the pitfalls? Keith, I understand that you are about to deliver 9 new cars to one Sussex company. Are you seeing an upturn in business from startups and SMEs across the area? And what do you think about those brave startup companies?
Well, I think we're fortunate. We're in a sector of retail where we're seeing an upturn, 2.2 million new cars sold last year, and the industry is having to employ people deliberately to look after SMEs. It's great for us. Mercedes-Benz have gone out and done just that. We're seeing the same with Audi. A lot of the prestige markets, fantastic performance at the moment, and these parts of the business are opening up deliberately to give them the opportunity to join into that, and so yeah, we've seen quite a lot of intake on that. It's all new ground for a lot of people, but we've been quite fortunate.
Good. John, what are you seeing? A lot of new startups?
I am. I'm not sure that the startups will be buying Mercedes-Benz cars straight away. I think the most important thing with any startup is to ensure that you've got proper planning.
Yes.
You can't just on a whim think I'll start a business. It takes a degree of research, a substantial amount of research, in fact, I would suggest, and proper advice. Needless to say, lawyers play a part in that, but so also accountants and bankers generally. You've got to get your business plan down on paper. You've got to make sure that it's tested as far as you possibly can before you launch. But as a means to make a career, I would say it's a wonderful thing,
Yes.
and I would recommend self-employment for anybody that has the ability to harness their talents with the reality of finance and hard work.
Yes, and hard work, of
And
course,
hard
is
work.
the key thing, and not everybody appreciates that. Bruce, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. The key, though, as John has indicated, is planning and really understanding your business and getting advice. I think there's plenty of advice that's available at the moment, which may be free. The internet is a great source, but I think you'll find that there are lots of organisations who are willing to give time to start up businesses. And in terms of legal advice, it's always an expensive area for startups. But again, we're running some free online advice at the moment, which we've been running for a few months, and that seems to be a good take-up in certain areas. And I'm sure other businesses will be doing much the same. It's that time to encourage new business.
Yes. And can I ask Amanda, do you use, there's a lot of free advice and what have you, do you tap into any of that knowledge yourself? Is, through the HR, do you use online at all? Do you use the social media links at all? How do you recruit, basically?
Yeah, we have obviously given the numbers I was talking about earlier, it's really important that we are out there everywhere and using whatever media and methodology is available to us. So yes, we have a combination of online, traditional methods, direct advertising, being out and active in the community and making sure that we are part of that and very visible, and I find all those different methods help with that. And I think in terms of starting up businesses, what I would say is that it's so essential, and this is something that we focus on as well, is to really focus on the customer in a way that perhaps businesses haven't done so in decades before. In the context where there is ever more information at our fingertips, I think it's easy to assume we know what the customer needs, and I think any business, whether it's a start-up, whether it's a big company like Hastings Direct, we need to always bear that in mind, that do we really understand what the customer needs are and the context and their community within which they sit, and are we meeting those needs?
Thank you. And Nick, brave or foolish do you think to start a business?
Probably a bit of both, but you probably need both of them to be successful. I think startups is a fantastic way to go. I think what John and Bruce have both said about planning and support is vital. And I think there is a difficult challenge, and it's interesting what Amanda just said then, because essentially lots of people, we get startups coming to us all the time for finance, and lots of people come with a good idea, but they haven't really thought a lot about what a customer really wants and whether they can sell this for profit. They don't monetize it, so it goes back to this planning. I think we've also got a challenge that it's easy to have a good idea, but the finance isn't available. Funding for startups is low, but things like crowdfunding are filling that gap. Private investors are filling the gap because they can't get a return for their money in the bank, so they're putting it into private venture. And we're lucky enough to be in Brighton, which is the capital of startups in the UK over the last few years because of our digital and creative industries, and I think it is a way forward. I think the challenge for the country is going to be that what do the startups do next? So lots of companies grow to £300,000-500,000 and become lifestyle companies, employ one or two people and don't go on from there. And as a country, the growth has got to come through these startups and they've got to go to stage 2. But yes, definitely a good time to be starting if you're thinking of it.
Thank you. So the capital of startups for Brighton, Clarence. When you get in, or if you get in and what have you, how could you further support these brave startups to take them to the next level, as Nick intimated?
Well, Nick's absolutely right. I mean, there is a vibrant digital economy here in Brighton itself, which is fantastic news and a great example to the rest of the country. It shows it can be done. Brighton is, of course, a very creative city, always has been, and has good media connections. I would endorse everything that's been said by the panel. Of course, planning is essential, proper long-term planning and proper financial thinking it through as to where this will go and what are your key market points in the immediate and to the mid-term as well. That said, the government will always support anybody who is prepared to get out there, work hard, do the right thing, and rely on their own resources to a certain extent. We have always supported self-determination to that degree, and this is a living example. Brighton is a living example of what can be done with the right thinking. Nick also makes the point that funding is at a lower level through schemes like funding for lending that the government encourages, both for the larger company as well as the startup. We will again do everything we can to ensure that the banks are fully behind those that are prepared to take that risk. I wouldn't say it's foolish to consider starting your own business. I say it's brave, but it's as good a time as ever now. And with the way that the economy is recovering and the way that you are instantly connected to your potential customer base through social media now, more so than ever before, you have that ability to get instant feedback and develop your business plan accordingly than you did in the past.
Yes, and thank you. And I think I'll move on to the next question because that does incorporate social media. Many new companies have a great product or service but fail to market themselves properly, especially when it comes to new technologies and social media. So this is further discussing, I think, what we've already started. So back to you again, Clarence, as a media expert prior to your political career. What would your advice be then to companies regarding the marketing and the PR?
I think you have the answer in your question. Social media is ignored at an individual or a company's peril these days, whether that's in terms of the basic marketing and advertising structure that will help to promote your idea, your product, or whether it's in terms of defending your reputation and make sure that your reputation is protected online. It is an essential component these days. I think there was a little bit of a slow uptake, certainly amongst more established companies, just a few years ago. Because it was felt to be something of an add-on, something that wasn't really necessary, didn't quite understand Facebook or Twitter, what does it all mean? Well, it is clear now that effectively your customer base has been weaponized as such. They can come back at you instantly if they don't like something, and boy will you know about it very soon. And rather than take that as a negative and be frightened of it, use it as a positive and make sure that you're out there in that conversation. Something that we've always said in my role within public relations is that if you don't get out there and tell your story rapidly, whatever it is, somebody else will, and you won't like what they're saying. So get out there and get into the mix quickly.
Interesting enough, I went to a startup business a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to go on there and do it. What a fantastic, what a great place. Please visit. Their website, you couldn't find it. When you did find it, it was atrocious. The links didn't work. And going back to everything the panel said here, that's so key. And if you can't get on there and say something nice, then people won't hear about you.
Yes, I think people often refer to it as like the moment of truth, and somebody will Google you or what have you, and it is that moment of truth, the first few seconds of that experience for that business. Staying with you for a second, so do you use social media as a business overall, or do you encourage individual members of staff to be involved on social media, such as using LinkedIn? And what have you? Do they all have LinkedIn profiles?
We do, yeah. We find LinkedIn is very good for networking. As regards of advertising and getting the business message out there, for us it doesn't, we've done a lot of research on that, we've done some advertising on there. We don't personally find that brings us a lot of interest, but Facebook does. Facebook's so easy to sign up to, everybody sees it. You write something and it's shared across such an audience that it's quite key really. Again, it's a push-pull marketing, so we shouldn't be out there telling them about this great opportunity and how much per month it is. But when people see that we deliver a great service, and in fact we react very quickly to comments and criticism, that's what's key for us.
Cool. Bruce, do you use social media?
Oh yes, we do, and LinkedIn is key in terms of networking. All of our teams are on the LinkedIn, and we use Twitter to lead into our website, and also we have Facebook presence as well. And we use blogs on a regular basis, and if we think it's highly relevant to particular sectors or clients, we will send it direct to them via LinkedIn or by their own email. It's a standard process, I think, these days in any business.
Good. And Nick, I think you are on social media because I think we might be linked. Can I ask particularly about LinkedIn? Do you actually use the groups as well?
I'm an anti-LinkedIn person, I declare.
Right, oh okay. We are linked on LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, you are linked to something on LinkedIn. But
right.
I've tried cancelling my LinkedIn 5 times. I was getting 120 emails a day of people trying to get to me, and it was a raving nightmare. So having said that, as a firm we use it a lot, and we use it for marketing, and we use it to get to people. So in terms of using the professional level of LinkedIn. But I think in terms of a social media connection, we all know how important it is. I think it's massive in terms of profile, but it's also a fantastic tool in terms of finding business. But there is a differential between the business to consumer and the business to business. Business consumer, the whole social media, the web can be your way to get the business. Business to business, you still have to have the other tools. And we get too many people who set up a business, have a business plan, have an idea, and going back to an earlier point, haven't understood what their consumers want or how to get to their consumers. And they come in after a year or 2 years that they've grown a bit and they can't get any further. So it's a combination of the new and modern technologies with the traditional routes, and sometimes that means phoning somebody up and going to see them.
Yes.
So they're both in there somewhere.
And thank goodness for that.
Exactly.
And can I just ask before moving on from you, Facebook at all? Just
I don't do
Facebook as
any
well.
of it. I mean, we use it in the firm all the time. We use it for
but
vetting
not
with the
for
employees. We look at the thing, but
No.
it's not for me. I hate the whole lot of it.
Yeah. Yes, okay. John, yes or no?
Yes to social media. Do we embrace it as others here around the table are talking? Perhaps not as much, no. But our website is undoubtedly a fantastic tool, and it drives enormous amounts of business. And we put articles on there which are relevant to the areas that we're involved with, and that gives us good links and feedback. LinkedIn also we use. But Facebook, it's a challenge for this year, perhaps.
Yeah. But staying with you again, John, some people do say that websites maybe are losing favour against social media. Do you think there's any truth in that?
Undoubtedly, nothing is forever, so things change. But certainly, I think you need to embrace the technology that's available. For me, the website is the most important tool. Whether it will ever be replaced by Facebook, I doubt.
Okay.
A website is a form of social media in one sense anyway.
Indeed,
You're still
yes.
communicating.
Yes. Thank you very much for that discussion. So, many new businesses and indeed many established companies fall foul of red tape, bad debts and legal minefields in their rush to market. Could I firstly ask both John and Bruce, what advice would you give to such companies regarding legal protection and preparation in advance of trading?
You're going to go first, John? Or
Certainly, I'll go back to the point that I was making at the beginning about planning. You need to do the research in order to establish what the bits of red tape are that you're going to be encountering. Unless you've got an understanding of your market sector and how many licenses or certificates that you need to put in place for your particular business, then you'll fail at the first offence. So yes, there's a huge amount of red tape out there. Some of it perhaps unnecessary, but nevertheless we have to deal with it. There's no getting away from it. The red tape varies, of course, according to the sector that you're in. Health and safety is my particular bugbear.
Yes.
I think we've gone far beyond what is necessary from a health and safety perspective, and it's more it's over-regulated as an area. But every single business that operates has to deal with health and safety as a fundamental area. In my own area of law, we're over-regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and I imagine that would be endorsed by accountants in relation to their current regulations. They're there for the benefit of the consumer, but I think the pendulum perhaps is swinging too far towards the consumer, and it needs to rebalance to get a better position in the market.
Yeah. Pendulum swinging too far, Bruce?
I think there are arguments to support that, but if we were looking at small businesses, micro businesses, maybe up to 9 employees, I think those types of businesses will really struggle with the raft of legislation and regulation. John's mentioned health and safety, you have data protection, working time directives, but again, the advice is seek the information that you need. I'm sure there are plenty of websites available for startups, and I'm sure businesses, accountants, solicitors are looking to smaller businesses for the future. You have to build that client base. And medium-sized businesses as well, I think, will also struggle. And I think there's a lot of issues surrounding the smaller business, and there's, I think, some leverage that they can work on if they were to group together to share information. But also, I think there's pressure from medium-sized businesses to cut back on some of the regulation. It's so difficult, but of course, in a lot of areas, you will need it.
I think, Amanda, is essentially what's happened is that red tape is never a burden. We've had people come to us to see how to manage it, and on our interim side, we get cries for help all the time, saying how do we deal with this and how we deal with that. And I think, having sat on a deregulation committee about 10 years ago on how to try and get rid of some of the red tape, when you look at the papers, they all have common sense. Whether it's health and safety or working time directive, when you read the papers, you think, actually, this makes sense, we do need it. It's the application of it and the regulation of it that goes wrong, where we get over-officious civil servants taking it to the letter of the law, not the intention of the law. And I think that's what we've got to cut back by. So I think a lot of time it's not that we need to get rid of the base legislation, we need to see how we manage that legislation. And a small example of that was the other day I spoke to a tax inspector, and the tax inspector said that we consider any underpayment of tax to be fraud. Now, when you can have a senior tax inspector saying that, and you imagine small businesses, they do make mistakes, even big businesses make mistakes. We can argue about Google and some of these businesses that aren't paying their tax in the country, which we all think they should be, but there's an attitude problem at the moment that, morally, whether it's health and safety, it's tax, it's some of the other minor regulations, that we are officiously adhering to those in the wrong way. And some of our European colleagues are more forthright about how they deal with it.
It's often the unintended consequences of good intent.
Yeah.
And I think personally I'm delighted that the government has recognised in recent years that employment legislation in particular has been a victim of that, and I think that's really improved in the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, as always, it needs some common sense and frankly some humanity brought into it. But you're right, some of the frameworks that are there for very good reason that should be acted upon. Of course, nearly 3 years ago now, the Red Tape Challenge, as it was coined, was launched. It's been estimated that saved around 3 billion in reduced bureaucracy already, and that work very much continues. On employment legislation, for example, the qualification period for unfair dismissal tribunal has been doubled to enable companies to be able to take on people more easily. we will always work to reduce the burden on business wherever possible. And another initiative, again announced fairly recently, was the 1 in, 2 out principle, whereby any new regulation that comes in must be matched by 2 or those leaving the system that are of twice the value of the regulation coming in.
Good.
And in principle, that's working as well. So we will cut where necessary and reduce the burden and make life easier for businesses wherever possible.
Thank you. Have you had any experience of that at all, Keith? Red tape may be easing up from you as employers in the marketplace, or indeed have you seen any reflection on red tape changing, so bringing more potential customers into you? Has it hindered you or helped you in any way at all?
I don't think the customer-wise hasn't affected us that I'm aware of. It's more employee-based really. As you said, there's been changes in human resources, and now that we've got more flexibility in that, I think an awful lot of time we were scared to do some, take action where necessary, because there was all this protection behind employees, which actually wasn't really there. It was we can't do this, you can't do that, and I think with reference to our HR colleague in the room, people get very scared of it, and we shouldn't be. We need to be observing it, we need to be respectful of it, but if we have something to deal with, we should deal with it without reflection of what's going to happen next, and can we do that, and what will the newspapers say about it. If it's wrong, we should deal with it.
Yes. In the first issue of Absolute Business magazine, we have an exclusive interview with James Kahn, who has just been voted Chairman of the Year and has been handed £112 million by the government to lead the charge on apprenticeships. What is your view on apprentices and education, and how best we can nurture and retain new talent? Clarence, as it is a Conservative initiative, what's your view on how we can best nurture such talents?
Well, apprenticeships are absolutely vital if we are to begin to dent the problem of youth unemployment. It is a vital way to gain experience and skills that hopefully will set you up in that particular sector very well. But on top of that, it gives a sense of purpose, it gives a sense of direction and incentive for young people to get out there into the world of work as quickly as possible. We've already created as a government more than 500,000 apprentices since the last election, something like 520,000 in 2011-12 alone, far more than the previous government ever did. So that's why we are investing, that's why we are bringing the apprenticeship back as a central tenet, if you like, of the employment world. They'd fallen somewhat out of fashion, I think, in recent years, and always were associated with perhaps engineering and the manufacturing side of the sector. We see them as far more widely applicable than that. They can be in all sorts of specialist areas where the concept, they may well vary in style depending on the sector, but the concept of getting into the world of work early and quickly and effectively is to be supported, and as the economy grows, as more and more companies begin to employ people, we hope that more and more apprenticeships will be taken on and created, and we'll always support those as well.
Thank you. Amanda, I can see you nodding as Clarence is speaking, what have you. Do you as a business tap into the apprenticeship scheme at all?
We do, but not as much as we would like to, and that's something that we want to get more involved in. In the past when we've looked at it, it was actually just very difficult to actually administer, and I think it's got to be made easy for businesses to take advantage of it, and we found that wasn't the case a couple of years ago. I think apprenticeships have a fantastic opportunity to help businesses, and certainly that's something that we want to do.
Thank you. Can I ask, John, have you seen or heard of any experience contrary to what Amanda has just said, where businesses have taken on apprentices and used them in a way as sort of cheap labour, rather than sticking with the principle of actually engaging an apprentice and then developing them within that role? Have you heard anything contrary to that, where businesses have maybe abused that concept or not? Is Amanda right?
I've heard stories, but I haven't had any personal experience, and in fact my experiences range over not only my own firm, but also more than several other firms that I know have taken on apprentices and have done very well with them.
Yes.
They've retained them after the end of their apprenticeship, as indeed my firm has. And one of the points that I think was made earlier by Clarence, that Originally, the apprenticeship scheme seemed to be locked into engineering and those sort of areas. I think that's now gone completely. And wearing my other hat as a governor of a further education college, I know that in Brighton, the apprenticeship scheme has been endorsed by so many other businesses, and it's been a very useful stepping stone for people to come out of education into a workplace environment.
Yeah.
So it's an excellent scheme.
Thank you very much, everyone. So another feature within the first Absolute Business magazine will be women in business. We will ask the question, is there still a glass ceiling, and do women still have to fight harder than men for their rightful place in the boardroom? Amanda, you've risen to become a director of one of the largest companies, and I note that you are the only woman on the panel, apart from me, of course. What is your view on this potentially sensitive subject?
I think things are really changing, and having said that, I think there is still a long way to go. I think, it's not all that long ago that we were in a working environment where there was direct discrimination against women, and we were, as a society, in the first part of the century, there were clear differences in how males and females were treated. Obviously, we've come a long way since then. I think it takes a long time to undo some of those things. I think obviously there is no longer practices in the workplace which make it difficult for women. However, I think what we now need to focus on is the fact that there are unconscious and subtle ways in which businesses are still run, which means that women end up opting out of those senior positions. But having said that, I think, again, that is changing very slowly. We are in an environment now where females in general are outperforming males coming out of university, and there's lots of statistics and research to show the competences of females are being much more overtly recognised in workplaces. And at the same time, there are lots of mentoring programs which help women specifically to overcome some of those environmental factors which might cause them to opt out. So I think things are changing, things are getting better, but it will take some time.
Yes, and I would endorse that too. Thank you very much. So, to the final question. As Absolute Business magazine is the first such new publication for many years, could I ask each of you what you feel are the relevant hot topics for Sussex businesses in 2014, and what would you like to see in our new magazine? I'd like to start, please, if I may, with John.
Well, this is an interesting hot potato, isn't it? I guess from the business point of view, the green issues are very much alive. That's with a small g, I think, rather than a big G. Although the bigger G perhaps also is relevant to Brighton particularly. The environment, I think, is high on the priority, and energy issues and so forth. We've got flooding to deal with as a current issue with the environment. And of course, business rates that we touched upon earlier in the discussion, I think, is also an issue for businesses. They are extremely high and a huge burden. So I'd like to see attention on some of those. How we deal with flooding in the short term, I don't think it's possible. It's a longer term, and it's obviously a country-wide issue, not just a local issue. The green issue, in terms of how we recycle and so forth, is clearly something that we will have to apply our minds to, and businesses are having obligations imposed on them to make sure they're greener than they used to be, and so there's a cost involved there. The burden of business taxes, business rates, I think is something that we have to tackle. I think there's too much reliance placed by local government and government generally on businesses to maintain the cash flow.
Yeah.
So just a few topics there.
Lovely, thank you. Clarence?
I think that to many young people, the world of business, the corporate world, if you like, feels somewhat close to them, and somehow for people who are already established and who are perhaps further down the road in their career. So I would like to see a new magazine, focusing occasionally on a champion, if you like, of internships, apprenticeships, a company that is helping young people to get that foot on the ladder. And let's see that across Sussex, perhaps pick a Brighton or a different town in each edition, and let's see what the young people are doing to begin to be helped into the world of work, and let's see that the business community that consumes the media, consumes the magazine, understands their problems and is actively assisting them to get that foot on the ladder. So yes, youth champions, if you like, across Sussex would be something I'd like to see in different issues.
Good, thank you. And Amanda, do you support that? And do you have other ideas as well?
I do support that, and speaking as a Brighton and Hove resident rather than necessarily working facings direct, I think it would also be great to see a focus in the magazine that really reflects the culture in Brighton and the fact that we're so community orientated. Yep. And I'd love to see something which encourages, ethical business, the merging of business goals with the needs of the community. And I think you're starting to see that in Brighton, and I'd like to see more of that.
Lovely, thank you. But bearing in mind, of course, the magazine is addressing all of Sussex, I wonder, Keith, what are your ideas?
I think for me, really, it's around travel and parking. We spoke about this, previous to the meeting, and it becomes everybody's main issue now. Where can you park? How long it takes you to get there? The road works. We know there's obviously been reduction on costs for repairs to the road, but it just stops you from. I now travel a lot less between sites, which okay is great for the green issue, etc. But actually, I need to be on site. I need to see these places and make sure they're as they should be, and help and coach people on site. But all of our industry now, we're worried about travelling because it takes so long, the damage to the cars, the cost of the fuel, and as much as we can talk about communication through other networks, it's we need to be on site.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Yeah, I think the one thing the magazine really can do is to pull Sussex together.
Yes.
And effectively become the voice of the business in Sussex. I mean, Brighton's a massive centre. It still takes too long to get from Brighton to Eastbourne to Hastings to Chichester because of our road network. Our train network's falling to pieces. It can't cope with the volume going up to London, and we've got huge commuters in the area across Sussex. You arrive in Gatwick nowadays from the continent, and you get a full train full of Brighton commuters that you have to try and force your cases on. So there are huge infrastructure problems for Sussex as a whole. There's investment questions for Sussex as a whole, and I think if a magazine can pull together the interested parties and lobby for Sussex business, it will do a great job. I think the regular topics that we've covered this morning, which are covered on a general basis or a specific basis, should go alongside it. And I think if we can have champions for all kinds of sectors by identifying the success stories across the county, I think that's going to be of interest to the readership. But the one thing I'd like to see is a lobbying voice that pulls together the SME and larger sector to fight for our county.
That's lovely, thank you. And the final word on this subject, Bruce, and indeed rounding up our discussion here today, what are your thoughts, pulling together all that you've heard, linked to what you feel too?
Well, with Rix & Kay having offices in Uckfield as well as Brighton and Hove, we're quite well placed being in mid-Sussex for travelling around. But it is a major problem for, I think, retention of people working in the Sussex area. There's the lure of London. I'm sure as we come out of recession, London will be taking more and more of our really good people at all levels. And we've got to find ways of demonstrating that Sussex is a great place to live and to work. And I think highlighting some of the best companies in Sussex, highlighting some of the real core issues that need to be addressed, as Nick has alluded to, in transport. I think the magazine has a huge opportunity to really make an impact in a whole raft of areas about keeping people working as well as living in Sussex.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this, our first absolute business roundtable debate, and you'll be pleased to know we will be bringing these meetings to you on a monthly basis. We will be inviting experts from around Sussex to discuss issues that are relevant to your business.